and admit the last few and let Miss Cope take over.
So, hi everybody. My name is Caitlin Cope. I am a financial aid specialist at Saddleback College. No, I will not be answering. Oh, I don't know what happened there. I will not be answering any questions until the end of the presentation. A majority of your questions will be answered within the presentation. And then if there are personal questions, like Ms. Lunsford said, my personal email will be at the very end of the presentation for you to send a one-on-one email to me. I am working from home like most of you are. So if you hear noises, cats especially, I have one cat that loves to meow at the door when I'm doing these. I apologize for any noise. So let's get started. And then if you, again, we'll be answering questions at the end, just pop them into the chat and I will go through as many of them as I can within the interest of time. Or if you have those questions that are personal, again, my email will be at the end. So the first question students ask me about financial aid is, why should I even apply? Is there a purpose for me applying? Yes, there is. So we as financial aid specialists, we don't know what you qualify for until you actually apply. The reason for that being the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, they take all the information on that application and plug it into a 40-page formula. The application itself, the FAFSA or DREAM Act, can do that within 20 seconds. We would take about 4 days to tell you what all that information means to do it by hand. So that's why it's so important to do the FAFSA application or the DREAM Act application, because it's going to kind of help us, give us a better guide so that we can tell you what you qualify for. We do have help available if you get stuck filling out your FAFSA or your DREAM Act application. We have our virtual front counter. Right now, due to COVID, our campus is closed. So we are not working in the office, but during our business hours, Monday through Friday, our virtual counter is open. Just make sure to check our business hours because they do vary from day to day. And we are a little bit impacted this week, especially with the fires. We have 3 people that were evacuated. So our hours may vary this week, but come next week, hopefully, fingers crossed, all the fires are out and we'll be back to our normal business hours. You can still apply for financial aid even after the semester starts. A lot of students don't know that. It doesn't take long to apply, and it's free to apply. So it should never cost you any type of money. So there's 2 different types of applications for 2 different types of people. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And that's for US citizens and eligible non-citizens, meaning they have a green card, a certificate of naturalization, asylum, or permanent residency. I know that's a lot of things to think of, but basically if you're a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen, you would do the FAFSA. If you are to qualify as a DREAM Act student, you would have to be an undocumented student or qualify under the AB 540 laws of the state of California. So you need to graduate from a California high school and have lived in the state of California for at least a year and 1 day. You do not and cannot do both applications. It's one or the other. Please, please, please do not do both. Do the one that applies to you. Doing both is going to only make things a lot longer of a process and make it a little more complicated for you as the student or you as the parent. It's going to be a nightmare. So make sure to choose one and go with it. The purpose of these is to figure out your financial aid eligibility. So basically, so we can kind of help determine what you qualify for. For the FAFSA, it's a universal application to be considered for aid. So what that means is you can add up to any 10 schools on the FAFSA application, and that one application is going to go to all 10 schools. If you are applying to more than 10 schools, you can only do those first 10 at a time. So as you go through schools, maybe you go and tour with your student if the school's open, and you're like, students like, this is not for me, you could go back on and make changes to the FAFSA or the DREAM Act to remove schools and add new schools. You would just have to resubmit each time you want to change any, if you're looking at more than 10 schools. The DREAM Act, you can add up to any 10 schools in the state of California. So the DREAM Act does not go beyond the state. So any 10 schools in the state, again, same process. If you decide if you're applying to more than 10, you can always go back and edit the DREAM Act to change the school of record that you're looking to go to. Oh, also, sorry, let me go backwards. I keep forgetting this. Please, please, please make sure you're going to the .gov websites for either one of these applications that you're going to apply to. The .coms and .orgs tend to be scam sites where people get their identities stolen, money stolen. It's a nightmare. So you want to make sure it's .gov. These are what the websites look like. So this one here is the FAFSA. The one over here is the DREAM Act. So if you're not seeing one or the other of those, whichever one you're applying to, get out of there quick. And you can always double check and make sure you're going to the .gov site. So there's two main academic requirements that are required to be able to be eligible for financial aid. So the first is to determine your student's unmet need. So they take the cost of attendance of the school, and that's going to vary from school to school. This is huge. Community colleges are going to be a lot less or have a lot lower cost of attendance than, say, a UC or a private school. So for each school, this calculation is going to be different. It's not going to be the same. So just an FYI. Then they subtract what's called your expected family contribution. The expected family contribution is a number that's generated after you submit. You have to actually physically hit submit the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. That number will be at the lower right-hand corner of your confirmation page. But in order to get it, like I said, you have to go through the whole application and hit submit. I cannot estimate your EFC. That's what that 40-page calculation is for, and that would take me 4 to 5 days. And I don't want to do that by hand. And that calculation would equal your remaining student need and potentially what we could pay through various types of financial aid. The second one is very much up to the student. Is to meet certain academic requirements. The student, so I always like to stress, people ask me, is this only at Saddleback? No, this is a national thing. So students have to maintain a cumulative 2.0 GPA and complete 67% of all units they attempt at the college they are attending. So if they fall below these standards, your student may have to appeal to get their aid back. So they would lose eligibility, have to reappeal. A committee usually makes a decision yes or no. If the answer is no, they go a whole semester without financial aid. So please, 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 as the student, make sure you're paying attention to your grades. If, like me, there's a class that my freshman year, I'll give this as an example. My freshman year didn't do well in math. Not gonna lie, math, it's funny, I'm a financial aid specialist and I'm bad at math, right? That's hilarious. But I was in pre-calculus and I didn't do very well and my GPA fell and I did have to appeal for financial aid for my second semester in college. So it's important. Luckily, I was able to show that that professor was a bad grade. She actually ended up getting fired. But I was able to show that I was having difficulties. Other students were having difficulties. I had documented cases of what was going on and was able to prove my case, and my appeal was approved. So it's not a life or death thing. I know students are like, oh my gosh, I have to appeal. Don't freak out. Just follow the instructions. And usually it's not that big of a deal. So it happens. Trust me, it does. I've been there. So definitely, if you have questions about it, you can always call us. Also, eligibility, you do have to graduate from high school. You have to have your high school diploma, your GED, or the equivalent to receive financial aid. If you don't, then we unfortunately can't award that to you. You also have to be working towards some type of degree, certificate, or transfer program. So this is hugely important. So when you're filling out your applications, you want to make sure you have some type of program that you're working towards that's degree, certificate, or transfer. A lot of schools will accept undecided, but you want to, like as your major, but you want to say, I'm working towards an associate's or a bachelor's degree or a certificate in something. So basically, they just want to see that you're working towards an end goal to get some type of degree or certificate. We talked about the satisfactory progress standards in the last slide. You want to make sure to maintain the minimum cumulative 2.0 and the 67%. For federal aid, you do have to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So basically, DREAM Act students unfortunately do not qualify for federal aid. And then for gentlemen, for both the FAFSA and the DREAM Act, they are required to register for the selective service if they're in between the ages of 18 and 25. So this is not optional. If you do not fill it out, you cannot get financial aid, period. If you skip the question on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, they'll ask you, are you registered? If your student says no, you will then be asked, do you want us to register you? So you can click yes there and it will register you and you won't have any more issues. If you don't click that or you click no, you may be asked for additional documentation later, which will delay the financial aid process. So it's not only a financial aid requirement, it is also a federal requirement. So kind of just throwing that out there that you have to do it to move forward in the process. So moving into federal aid, this slide is all the federal aid that the federal government provides that does not have to be repaid. So it's basically the free money section. The Pell Grant is this year got increased by $250. So this is amazing. So for this year right now that we're in, the 2020 to 2021, the annual amount is $6,345. So that may change when your student goes into college next year. So it can fluctuate from year to year. So sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Although I've never seen it go down and I've been in financial aid for 10 years, I've only seen it increase. A lot of the times it stays pretty stagnant, but I think because of the coronavirus, they increased it this year, which was amazing. So the amount your student will get of that Pell Grant is going to be based on their financial need, cost of attendance at the school, their status as a full-time or part-time student. So how many units they enroll in is going to make a difference in the amount of Pell Grant that they receive. And then your plans to attend school for a full academic year or less. So obviously we can't award a full annual amount for one semester's worth of schooling. Also too, with Pell Grant, it's important to note that you cannot get Pell Grant at more than one school at a time. So if you as a student or a parent, if your student is dual enrolled, it's important to note that you have to choose one school or the other to get your aid at. That's a huge deal because otherwise you're going to have to pay one or the other of the schools back, and that could be very painful on your pocketbook. So definitely keep that in mind. The FSEOG, or the Federal Student Equal Opportunity Grant, that's a huge mouthful, I always stumble on that one, is administered directly by the financial aid office at each participating school. And I say participating school because not all schools choose to participate in this program. So it basically is a supplemental grant on top of the Pell Grant. Saddleback does participate, so usually it's between $200 and $800 a semester on top of what you qualify for Pell Grant. The amount varies depending on the amount that we receive from the federal government for that year, because that fluctuates every year as well, and for each semester. So it's always important to get your FAFSA or your DREAM Act in advance, and we'll go over that in a few minutes about the priority deadline. But that's one of the things that is dependent upon the priority deadline, is the FSEOG. And the Federal Work Study Program is an on-campus job opportunity for your student to work an on-campus job up to $2,000 a semester Yes, it is taxable, but it is a great way to earn money that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten. I did a federal work study job on campus at Cal State Fullerton. I was a campus tour guide. It was an amazing opportunity for me to not only get a little extra money to go to school, but it really improved my public speaking skills. I did a lot of networking and connecting, and it was great for my resume. Um, right now, a lot of schools have their federal work study program frozen due to COVID-19, us included. They are hopeful that they will have it back. Some schools already have it back for this coming spring. I know Saddleback unfortunately will not, but we are hoping to bring it back fall of 2021. So that will be something that you as the student or your student will be eligible for at that time. We usually have if you're planning on coming to Saddleback, we have a sign up sheet that usually begins mid-July. So there are usually more students than there are jobs available. So that's something to keep in mind, at least at Saddleback. Other schools, it may vary. So federal loans. So this is the only type of aid we're going to talk about that you have to repay after you graduate. So both of these loans have the same interest rate. This year it is 2.75%. So just like the Pell Grant fluctuates, the interest rate for these loans changes from year to year as well. And it's like a roller coaster. I've seen it go up, down, up, down, up, down all my years here. This is the lowest I've ever seen it due to COVID-19. It reduced quite a bit, but I don't know what that's going to bode for next year. Both of them also require you to be enrolled in a minimum of 6 units per semester and maintain a minimum 2.0 cumulative GPA. And of course, you do not have to have a credit score or a FICO score to qualify for these loans. There's none of that required, but there is a major difference between the two. The subsidized loan will pay your interest while you're in school. The unsubsidized loan will not. So you begin paying interest quarterly right away on that unsubsidized loan. Subsidized loan is up to $3,500 for the year. Unsubsidized loan is up to $6,000 for the year. So with that, I always say, if you don't need loans, don't take them. If you do need them, take only what you need and start first with the subsidized loan. You do not have to take the full amount that's offered. A lot of students think that they have to take the full amount. No, that's not true. I think the minimum a student can request, which is kind of silly, but it's $100. But always start first with the subsidized loan and then move on to unsubsidized if needed. Also with loans too, it's important if you're going to, because Saddleback doesn't do this, but I know some of the private schools and sometimes even the UCs do this, they auto accept loans on your behalf. So it's important to read your award notices as they're coming in. If they're saying, oh, we're going to offer you this loan and you don't want it, make sure to decline it. Say, I'm not interested in it. That's a big, big deal. A lot of schools will, well, not a lot, but there's a handful of schools that will auto accept the loans on your behalf. So just be aware of that. So Cal Grant, so we're moving into the state portion of this presentation. So this applies to both FAFSA and DREAM Act students. So this is where the big priority deadline comes in. And again, I'm going to stress the word priority. You can still fill out your FAFSA or your DREAM Act after this date. So the 2021 to 2022 FAFSA and DREAM Act opened up October 1st, and that's the one you guys are going to want to complete. The priority deadline to get it in is March 2nd. The reason for that is if you miss that priority deadline, you miss out on the Cal Grant for the entire year. So that's going to be a huge amount of money lost especially if you're going to a Cal State or UC. So you want to turn it in before March 2nd, 2021. The Cal Grant at the community college level, at least, is usually between $800 and $1,000 a semester. At the four-year schools, it could be a little bit higher, though I've been out of the four-year school industry for about 4 years, so I'm not too sure what it's up to about now. But it is worth your time because the state aid and the federal aid, so the Cal Grant aid and the federal aid stack. So if you're a FAFSA student, you can get both at the same time. So that's a big deal. DREAM Act students, if you miss this priority deadline, it's going to really hurt because this is a majority of your aid for the year. So definitely apply before March 2nd. On top of the Cal Grant is the Student Success Completion Grant. This grant is awarded to students who are awarded Cal Grant B or C. There's three types of Cal Grant, A, B, and C. I'm not going to go into the differences between them because that would take several hours and I don't want to bore you with the facts, but you can find them if you're interested in learning more about the different types. You can always go to the California Student Aid Commission website and research those on your own. But basically, the Student Success Completion Grant is basically for students who are in 12 or more units. If you're in 12 to 14 units, it's an additional $649 for the semester. If you're in 15 or more units, it's an additional $1,500 a semester on top of the Cal Grant. So that's a really big deal. The California Promise Grant used to be called the BOG fee waiver. So sorry, it used to be called the BOG fee waiver, is not the same thing as the Saddleback Promise program. They are two completely different deals. So the California Promise Grant is for any student who is a California resident, meaning they lived in the state of California for a year and a day. There are certain income thresholds to qualify, though those are listed on the California Student Aid Commission website. And what this does is it waives your tuition costs only. So only tuition is waived by the California Promise Grant at the community colleges only. So that's a huge deal. The Saddleback Promise program is administered strictly by Saddleback College. This year, the requirements are a little different than last year. You do not have to do the Counseling 100 class. You do have to do a FAFSA or DREAM Act. That's a huge requirement. That's going to be very, very important to do. And there isn't a income threshold for the Saddleback Promise program. So those are the main differences between them. If you want to learn more about the Saddleback Promise program, I'm not an expert, but there is a website. So on saddleback.edu, you would click on our toolbar where it says Student Success, and then you could go to the drop down where it says Promise Program, and that will have the Saddleback Promise program information for this year for incoming freshmen for next year. So that's going to be your best resource. There's also a great phone number on there that goes directly to the specialists in that field for the Saddleback Promise program. So they're going to be your best resource on that. Unfortunately, my scope of knowledge on that is extremely limited. So I can give the basic facts, but that's about it. The Chafee Grant is another California grant that is for foster youth who are in the California foster youth. If you're in between, if you are in foster care between the ages of your 16 and 18 and have not yet reached your 22nd birthday, you have to do a FAFSA or a DREAM Act to qualify. And there's also the California Chafee Grant Program application. So that's going to be another big one that you would have to do in order to qualify for that. So let's see, moving on to the next slide. So the DREAM Act. So I always like to stress with the DREAM Act that the information on the DREAM Act is not going to be shared with any other governmental agencies aside from the Department of Education. It is private. It's not shared anywhere. You don't have to have a DACA status to qualify. It's basically a great resource for students who are undocumented. You do want to make sure, though, to apply by that March 2nd date, because as you can see, Cal Grant and that Student Success Completion Grant make up a majority of this student's aid. So it's going to be a huge deal to apply for that. It's also going to be a requirement for the Saddleback Promise program. So if you don't fill that out and you're a DREAM Act student, you're out of the Saddleback Promise program. So it's definitely worth your time to do it. It's an amazing opportunity. Definitely look into it. So dependent versus independent. So this is a big deal on the FAFSA. So just so you know, if you're a student, if you're the student and you answer no to all these questions, you're considered a dependent student, meaning you and your parents' tax information has to be on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. If you answer yes to one or more of these questions, you as a student are considered independent and do not have to put your parents' tax information. If your parents are divorced, you put the parent that you live with 50% or more of the time. If you're 50-50 custody, you choose a parent. I always get that question, so I gotta throw that out there. If you are a student that pays for your own expenses, you live on your own, everything else, but you still have contact with your parents, you're still a dependent student. The government will not change their ruling on that. However, if you have documented circumstances as to why you cannot talk to your parent, abuse, neglect, you have some type of police report against them, something like that, every school in the United States has a process called a dependency override. It could be called something different. It could be called like a dependency appeal or something else like that at different schools. But it's definitely worth your time to do, because that could change your status from dependent to independent. But you have to have those documented circumstances. You have to have proof of that in order to turn that in. If you don't, they're most likely not going to approve that. So it's a pretty standard thing. Also, I don't know, I've seen a couple of these come through the chat. I don't know anything about the CSS profile. I believe that's something you can talk to your campus counselors about, but that is outside of my forte. So I believe the counseling offices at your high schools would have more information on that. So applying for financial aid. The first step is only for FAFSA students. It's creating an FSA ID, and don't worry, we'll go over that in a second, what that is. Then, of course, you want to fill out whatever application applies to you, and then to follow up with the school you're planning on attending. So the FSA ID is for the electronic signature for the FAFSA. It'll also be used to sign in to the FAFSA form. You do have to know your social security number, your full legal name, and that's very important. Nicknames and things like that are going to cause issues, and your date of birth. Big deal this year and last year, don't know why, but people are putting today's date as the date of birth. Please don't do that. That's a headache to change later on. If you make a mistake on your FSA ID, it is not held with the school. You would have to call the Department of Education to fix that. And that could be a 2 to 3 hour phone call. So definitely make sure you double check all the information before you submit that FSA ID. If your student, if you as the student are a dependent student, one of your parents is also going to have to create an FSA ID. So parents, if you already have an FSA ID, because you did a FAFSA for an older student, you did one for yourself, you can use that FSA ID, but the new student going into college has to create their own. They cannot use a sibling's. They have to have their own information. If your parent cannot create an FSA ID, we do have a paper signature page that will be available on the end of the FAFSA application. You would click that you want to print that signature page, you would print it out, your parent would sign it, date it, and send it to the PO box number at the bottom of that page. Do not give it to your college's financial aid office. We can't send it for you. due to a federal privacy act called FERPA, which stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which means at the college level, the student has to act on their own behalf. So that excludes you as the parent from getting any information about the student's file. That includes during this time when they're applying, the student has to be involved in the application process. So if you're calling in to get help on the FAFSA, the student needs to give permission for us to speak to you. So that's going to be a big, big deal. It's just like when they turn 18 and they have to make their own doctor's appointments. Same thing goes for the college level. They have to act on their own behalf. And that's at any school in the nation. Big, big deal. So after you submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act at any school, it's never the final step. There's always going to be additional steps that are going to be required. That's going to vary from student to student. They're not all a uniform amount of forms that we ask for. The reason for that is because the FAFSA and the DREAM Act select 50% of all applications for a process called verification. So verification can ask for additional documentation on your household size, on your income, on your assets, on anything that they choose. And the reason for that is they're trying to keep people from defrauding these systems. So if you're selected for verification, you're probably going to be asked for something additional. Saddleback's process on notifying you on those would be to notify the student only, via their Saddleback student email. We are only accepting documentation online now. Everything gets turned in through the saddleback.verifymyfafsa.com portal. That's what it looks like kind of over here. If you are a DREAM Act student and you're coming to Saddleback, make sure to keep a note of your DREAM Act ID, because that's what you're going to use as your social to sign into this. So it's going to be a big deal. After you submit all the documentation that we're asking for at Saddleback, it can take between 6 to 8 weeks and 8 to 10 weeks to process that documentation. So it's not going to be an instantaneous award notice on that one. The 4-year schools can take even longer. They can take up to 14 to 16 weeks to process this documentation. So turning your application in before March 2nd is a great idea, because most schools, Saddleback included, we start bringing those applications in late March and start asking you for the documentation usually early April. So you're able to turn all this documentation in before your summer vacation. That's what I always say. Try and get it done before summer vacation, because then you can just sit back and relax and be ready for school to start. So scholarships. So there's a lot of different ways to find scholarships. So I always say for students to start first with their high school guidance office, guidance counseling, they all call it something different at each school. So guidance office, counseling office, informational office, I'm not sure, they're all been different. But basically the guidance office usually has some scholarships that are available for graduating high school seniors only. So these are local scholarships for graduating high school seniors that won't be available when your student gets to the college level. So that's a big one to go through first, because those, excuse me, those usually are not picked up by a lot of students. I don't know why, but a lot of students don't usually apply. So that's a good place to start. Another good place to look is with your employer or your parent's employer. So an example I have is my dad works for LA County Fire Department. Because I was his student or his dependent and I was going to school 12 units or more, I was able to get $1,000 scholarship for my freshman year. So that was huge for us, especially because my dad had just started in the fire department when I was going to be an incoming freshman. He was a little bit of a late bloomer, but definitely really cool. I've heard of ones for Starbucks employees, Burger King employees, McDonald's employees, Macy's employees. There's a lot of different ones out there. You just got to check in. I always say too, if you're touring the schools or if you're virtually touring the schools, check in with the department you want to major in if you know your major. that's going to be a great resource. Sometimes they have scholarships that the financial aid offices aren't aware of that might be only available through their department. And just be wary of scholarship scams. So scholarships usually will not need your social security number. They will not need, you should never be paying to get free money, if that makes sense. So you don't need to turn in an application fee because that's usually a scam. So just be wary of that. There are some reputable sites, which I will click here, is a list of our reputable search engines for scholarships. Ms. Lunsford, is this presentation going to be available somewhere for them to go back and look at these?
Yes, we're gonna have it posted on our website, and we'll share the presentation with the other schools as well to see if they want to do so. And then, in addition to that, we have these listed on our scholarship page on our internal website for the guidance department at Trabuco, as well as the guidance page on our school website.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
save everybody some handwriting or picture taking. You know, it's always a scramble. I see people moving in the background. But basically, these search engines go year round. So you can constantly apply for scholarships. They're a great resource because they're not all academic based. So you don't necessarily have to have that 2.0 or 3.0 GPA. You don't have to be a good essay writer. I got one years ago from fastweb.com that I found on their search engine for having brown eyes. I took a picture of my eyes. I wrote a 1-paragraph essay about why it was important for me to go to school, and I won $600. Very easy. Took me 5 minutes. Well, that sounds like a long time, but downloading speeds were a little bit slow back in 2007. It's definitely worth your while. I've heard of some students getting one for testing a video game for 3 days and giving their feedback. Most unique duct tape prom dress. One of my student employees last year won one for doing a Taco Bell rap. They went to Taco Bell and rapped about their favorite item on the menu and won a $2,000 scholarship. I don't know why, but that was something they could do. So there's definitely some really cool scholarships out there. It just kind of like having a second part-time job, looking them up, applying for them. It is worth your time though. I would say if you can try and do at least 2 a month, that's over 12, that's like 24 scholarships you're applying for every year. So that's a pretty big deal. It definitely helps you out. And it's free money you never ever have to pay back. So definitely something to look into. So wrapping up here, for the presentation part at least, definitely apply early. Apply prior to March 2nd to make sure you maximize the amount of aid you can receive. Ask questions. So visit the financial aid office either virtually or if they allow it right now physically, to ask questions at the college that you're looking to attend. So you can also ask us questions. Even if you're not going to be coming to Saddleback, feel free to contact us and ask us some questions. If we don't know, we'll tell you straight up, I don't know, but we can always look up the answer for you because that's a learning process for us as well, which is always good for me. I learn something new every single day about financial aid, and I've been in it for 10 years, so don't worry. Get help filing your FAFSA or your DREAM Act. So if you get stuck, we have that free resource during our business hours where you could jump on our virtual counter and get assistance. Like I said earlier, unfortunately at this time, we do not have after hours assistance due to the coronavirus. I've lost all my student employees that used to help me with that. And unfortunately, I don't have any more of them. I used to have 6 that would help me after hours, and they're all laid off due to COVID. So our virtual counter right now is our only resource for assistance with that. I would say too to check out cashcourse.org. It's a financial literacy website that helps you with budgeting, saving, and spending. It's an amazing website. It put me to shame on my coffee habit. I used to buy a Starbucks beverage 5 days a week, during the academic year. And I realized that was costing me like over $2,000 a year on coffee that I could make at home for a lot cheaper. And I ended up saving that money the next year and paying off my card loan. So there's it kind of puts things into perspective. Even for me as an adult, it was amazing. But as for an incoming college student, it's a great resource to learn about different ways for spending. And they also have a really good study abroad savings tool on there. So if you're interested in studying abroad, that's a good one. Otherwise, they have basic budgeting resources on there as well. And I'm going to skip a slide, so excuse that one. And I'll go straight to my contact info. This is my personal email. So if you have a personal question that you don't want to ask here in the chat, I will be happy to answer that. It does normally take me 24 to 48 hours to answer an email right now, just because it is our busy time of year with presentations. And I, this year, am the only one doing presentations. I do not have assistants this year. So that means about over 25 presentations I'm doing this month, and I think I have 15 next month. So definitely shoot me an email. I am pretty quick to respond, but if you need immediate help, you can always contact us on our phone line, on our virtual counter, or our office email, which is listed on our website. But it is SC, so S is in Sam, C is in Charlie, finaid@saddleback.edu. And I'll pop that into the chat right now as well. So let's do everyone, cfinaid@saddleback.edu. And with that, I will go to the questions that I saw in the chat. So if you have one you want to pop in here, please feel free to do so. There is a question, Ms. Lunsford, I'm not sure if you saw that, for something about yesterday's class for seniors.
I did see that, and I didn't know if that was a question specifically for my high school or for one of the other ones. I wasn't sure.
Gotcha. Okay. CSS profile, again, I don't really know anything about that. You'll want to ask your counseling office about that. There's a question, do you have to apply for a FAFSA or DREAM Act every year? Yes, that is a big deal. That's why it's very, very important to keep a notation of your FSA ID for both you and your student. Big, big deal. No, you do not have to apply by the priority deadline for the Cal Grant or the Pell Grant. It is specific only to the Cal Grant, but it is a big deal to turn it in by that priority deadline, because it's also going to be a good opportunity for you to get additional documents done in advance. This upcoming FAFSA for the 2021 to 2022 academic year will use 2019's taxes. So with that, a lot of students are like, whoa, you know, 2019 doesn't represent my family's income situation anymore due to COVID. If you have a change of income, you can replace that doing what we call a family contribution appeal. Other schools may call it something else. But that would it'd be an appeal to replace 2019's with 2020's income situation. However, you still have to submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act with 2019's information, or it will be rejected. That's going to be a huge problem. So you want to just make sure to submit the FAFSA or the DREAM Act with 2019, and then ask for a family contribution appeal once it gets into the school that you're applying to, and say, hey, I need to change my income situation. So definitely keep that in mind. Great question. So yes, the priority deadline of March 2nd is specific to graduating high school seniors. Juniors cannot apply for the FAFSA or the DREAM Act until their senior year. So it's only open for high school seniors. So the FAFSA, I don't really know anything again about the CSS profile. So, oh, it looks like that question was answered. Going through here, sorry you guys, it's hard with the chat, but it makes things easier. So no, not everybody's talking over one another. I was telling Ms. Lunsford, the first presentation I did, we opened it up for questions and people were talking over each other. It was so loud I had to take my headset off. It was insane. So if your parent does not have a social security number, like I said, there is the paper signature page that you would print out, sign, date, and submit to the PO box number at the bottom of the page. So that will be an option for you, for your parent to sign the FAFSA. The FAFSA, it's saying, well, the FAFSA doesn't require that GPA verification form. It's actually the DREAM Act, or sorry, not the DREAM Act. The Cal Grant is the one that requires the GPA verification. And usually that's sent in by your school unless you opted out. So you can always contact your school's guidance office and see what they have to say. If they're gonna, most 99.999% of the schools around here do turn in your GPA verification form for you unless you said, no, I don't want you to do that. So it says some financial questions are not required. They don't have the asterisks. Does that mean they may ask for it later? I would say to fill out everything that you have the information for, because there's 99% chance, if you skip something and somebody catches that, they're going to ask you for it. So I always say to fill in everything that you can just to save you time later on. Does the FAFSA or the DREAM Act take into account the number of children you have? Yes. So they take into the number of children you have, other legal dependents. So if you have power of attorney over a parent, or some other relative that you provide 50% or more of their care for, your spouse, if you have one, and things like that. They do take that into consideration, as well as how many of those members are in college as well counts towards that. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. Your household size, number in college, your income, all of that kind of flows together to kind of give you that EFC number that we talked about near the beginning. So I answered that question about if your parents don't have a social, they would have to print that signature page to sign the FAFSA. Can my students still register for summer classes at Saddleback? Yes, you still can. So if you're looking to do summer classes, you'd want to do a 2020 to 2021 FAFSA. So that's going to cover summer. The 2021 to 2022 is going to cover fall on. So great question. Let's see. Somebody asked if I have a personal question, where can I email it to? My email is right there on the screen. Feel free to do so. And yes, you do have to apply for the FAFSA every single year. It's important because they use a different tax year each year. They're also expecting that your family household size can change. So sometimes a dependent 1 year can move out and live on their own, where you're not supporting them 50% anymore. So that can change things as well. For the selective service question, you can always go back in and make a correction on the FAFSA to go ahead and say, yes, register me. So there should be an option to go back and change it if you answered no. So I think I got to the end of the questions that I had. So for merit scholarships, I'm not sure. Every scholarship has a different ruling, but most scholarships will want to see that you've completed a FAFSA or a DREAM Act, just because it may affect their decision making on that, though not all do. It's going to depend on each individual scholarship. Anybody else have any questions? I know it's sometimes hard to type your question into a chat box, but. Oh, this is a great question. Do you have to apply separately for the different types of aid? No. The FAFSA, if you're a FAFSA student, the FAFSA is going to cover you for the fee waiver, the federal aid and state aid all in one go. So you don't have to worry about that. And the DREAM Act is going to qualify you for the state, for if you're a DREAM Act student, it's going to qualify you for the state aid that you qualify for. Again, the FAFSA is for, if you weren't here at the beginning, the FAFSA is for US citizens and eligible non-citizens, meaning you have a green card, asylum, a certificate of naturalization, or permanent residency. The DREAM Act application is only for those students who are undocumented, but qualify under the AB 540 laws of the state of California. Anyone else have a question? I know it was a lot of information to throw at you guys. Oh, great question. If I have to mail the signatures, wouldn't I miss the deadline for FAFSA? No, not necessarily. The sooner you do the FAFSA and you do that signature page, the sooner they're going to get that signature page. So if you were to do it on March 2nd and turn in the signature page after that, there is a possibility it may be late, but you still hit submit on the FAFSA when you print the signature page. So it's still going to submit it on time. It's just the signature part may be a little delayed. Great question. That's a wonderful question. And yes, FAFSA applications are open now. The 21-22 FAFSA is the one you're going to want to fill out for graduating seniors. That's going to use 2019's application, or 2019's tax information. Sorry, you guys, I'm getting a little sleepy, I guess. And that's the one you'd want to fill out. And they opened up October 1st, and you want to try and apply by March 2nd to qualify for the maximum amount of aid, but you can still apply after that date. You just may not get all the aid that you would be entitled to otherwise. And somebody did mention some universities have earlier FAFSA priority deadlines. So yeah, that is something to look out for. I just know for state aid, definitely applying by March 2nd is going to help. Also, I didn't mention state aid does not cross state lines. So if you get awarded a Cal Grant, it's only going to stay in the state. You can't take it out of state with you. By linking your FAFSA to the IRS, would that mean they considered 2020 as the tax year? No, they would just be using the tax year the FAFSA, the DREAM Act is asking for. If my parents file taxes in another country, do I click foreign tax return? Yes. Are ethnicity and demographics factors when they come up in with your contribution? No. So it's based on a national average for income. So they're not taking into consideration where you live in the state, or what state you live in, what your race or ethnicity is. None of that's taken into consideration. How much state aid can one possibly receive? Well, I think when I did the calculation most recently, this is based on this year's numbers. So again, they change every year. I think it was up to a maximum of $10,500. So loans, what I said for federal loans is that they don't have to be paid each year, but if you take out a unsubsidized loan, you're going to be paying interest on that loan each quarter. So that's going to be a pretty big deal. So you'd want to start with subsidized loans if you're interested in taking out student loans, because those ones won't charge you interest while you're in school, and you wouldn't have to repay them until after you graduate. If you're a senior, do I apply for 21-22 FAFSA? Yes. If you go to an out-of-state school, do you lose the state aid? Yes. You would, it would not be able to follow you. If you get rejected for FAFSA, does the government automatically consider you for Pell? No. So the FAFSA, it has that EFC limit. Like I said, there's different thresholds for different types of aid. Usually if the FAFSA is rejected, it means something's wrong with the application itself. But if you are at an income threshold where you don't qualify for the FAFSA, that's usually if you go, this year at least, it's usually if you go over $7,000 as your EFC, then you may want to look into that family contribution appeal if you've had a difference in income between 2019 and the current year, or at the time when you're coming to school, it may be 2021. If you had a change in income since then, you can do that family contribution appeal and they can do a replacement to replace 2019's with 2020's or 2021's income based on your circumstances. No. So is your EFC what you should expect to pay, or does it depend on the school? No, your EFC is your expected family contribution. So it's what the federal and state government expect that you can pay toward your educational costs and expenses. That's just going to help us determine what your need is, your students' need. So they take the cost of attendance of the school, whatever that is for each school. So let's say it's a Cal State and it's, $10,000 for the year, and you have an EFC of $2,000 for the year. That's going to leave $8,000 of student need that we could potentially pay in financial aid. So it's not your number that you're expected to pay, because that's going to be a little different. The information I covered today in this presentation, the presentation is being recorded. Ms. Lunsford did mention that it's going to be listed on the Trabuco's website, and that she's going to be sharing the information with the other schools as well. So it's saying if your FAFSA, so basically if your EFC is too high, not if your FAFSA gets rejected, because of your parents' income, what other money would be out there for the student? Scholarships, scholarships, scholarships. I cannot stress scholarships enough. They're not necessarily based on your income. So it's important to keep going with scholarships. Anyone else? Oh gosh, Freshman Advantage. That is another thing that is outside of my realm of knowledge. I don't know if it would necessarily save money, but they offer priority registration. So that's a big deal. So you can kind of get a jump start above a lot of other students to register for your classes. Other than that, I would say to check out the saddleback.edu website and double check to see what their requirements are for this year and what they have to offer. I'm just not too savvy on Freshman Advantage, especially this year. I'm not sure if the regulations have changed for that. How do you apply for the Pell Grant? Simply by filling out the FAFSA. That's it. That's all you got to do. I would recommend, yes, even if your student is under the age of 18, still register them for the selective service question, because otherwise you're going to have to turn that documentation in later. Are there scholarships for bilingual students? I don't know. There are a lot out there. You'd have to search for them. There might be some online. There might be some on your school's guidance website. There's so many scholarships out there. I have no idea how many there are. There's probably millions. So it's important to keep searching and keep looking for them. How can we apply to the Promise program? The Promise program is on our website. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Hold on one second. I apologize if you see just a blank screen for a minute or my presentation. Bring this Google over here. So for the Promise program, on the saddleback.edu webpage, you'd go to Student Success, Promise program, and all the Promise program information is on here. So their information is all here. They have some great resources. Definitely, if you have specific questions, call this number during their office hours, which is usually Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They have specialists this year answering the phones for this. So that is amazing. And there's some other contacts down here too. Eligibility requirements, you can contact Georgina Martinez. She is amazing. So she would be a great resource for you guys to contact on the Promise program from Saddleback, at least. So yes, males are required to register for the selective service. It is not an option to say no. It is a requirement both for federal and state aid for the FAFSA and the DREAM Act, and it's also a federal requirement in general. So there's no way around that one. If your student is a conscientious objector, if they're ever called up to service, they can say they are a conscientious objector. I know I've gotten that question before, but that would be something that would come later on. So when and who do you find out the final tuition room board after FAFSA process is your app? That's going to depend on the school you're applying to. All of that is going to be different for each individual school. And the time frame on which you get your application in. That's another thing. Turning it in early is going to be huge to getting information on time. Are there any other questions? If not, we're about at the hour mark. If anybody else has any final questions, you can feel free to email me. I appreciate your time and being here today and putting up with us muting you and putting your stuff in the chat. I know that's always hard, but I do appreciate your participation and your being here. And I hope you have a great evening. Stay safe out there.
Thank you so much to everyone for joining us once again. And thank you, Caitlin, for presenting and offering your knowledge to all of our families. It's really appreciated.
You're very welcome. Thank you for hosting. And if you guys need anything, again, feel free to email me and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
See you at school tomorrow. Bye.